use this. I mean, I don't mind. Yeah. I don't think we need to. The only time for kirtan it may help, other than that, classes, there's definitely no need. No. I mean, seeing it's here now, we can use it. Or not. But it's not doesn't make a difference, really. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Okay. So today is it the appearance, do you remember, or disappearance day of Gopal Bhatta Goswami? You remember? It was announced, I can't remember which, whether it's appearance or disappearance. I get confused. But I can actually, oh no. I can't look it up. Yeah, I don't have. I'm just gonna try. If I. Oops. Yes, he'll know actually. Dis. Okay. Disappearance. Or disa. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna. July 20, what is it, 7? No. Oh, what's going on? 27th, 28th, is it? Oh, it's the 28th. Okay. Disappearance Day. Right. Okay. Hare Krishna devotees, we got cushions. Do you just take some of the cushions out and just put them somewhere so devotees have them available? It's okay. Solid. Well, I mean, it exists. It hasn't broken yet. Okay, devotees. Let's see. Right, here we go. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballava Giribaradhari Gopi Jana Ballava Giribaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajacharya, Tadashisamad His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki, ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki, Shri Giri Govardhan Ki, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki, Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami Ki, Gruntaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Gopremanande, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Devotees, Hare Krishna, do we have verse sheets? Did you use yesterday? It's did they use them yesterday? Did you use them yesterday?
Yeah, we did that. I'll go fetch quickly.
Oh, you were in the college room. So we're not in here every day. Oh, I see. Because I'm fussy. I was told, in fact, that the class was going to be here every day. Well, you've got telephones, right? Everybody's got a telephone. How many telephones? So just use your telephones, I guess. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So devotees, today on the disappearance day of Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis, we will read Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 31, Lord Kapila's instructions on the movements of the living entities, verses 22 and 23. And I guess we'll just use our telephones. Let's just do 22, seeing it is the first of the 2. Kapila Uvacha Evam Krita Matir Garbhe Dasha Masya Stuvan Rishi Sadhya Kshipati Avachinam Prasutyai Suti Maruta Kapila Uvacha Evam Krita Matir Garbe Dashamasya Stuvan Rishi Sajyashipachyavachinam Prasutyai Suti Maruta Kapila Uvacha Evam Krita Matir Garbe Dashamasya Stuvan Rishi Sadyashipatyavachinam Prasutyai Suti Maruta Kapila Uvacha Evam Krita Matir Garbe Dashamasyastu van rishi Sadya Shipachavachinam Prasutyai Suti Maruta. Ladies, please. Just a, Sanskrit, extremely mild, technical point, which I mentioned a while ago, not too long, a few months ago, that where you've got, as we see here, the second to last line, sadyakshipati avachinam, but actually the Y and the A in the last letter of the second word and the first letter of the third word, it's not shipati-a, it's shipat-ya. If you can read the actual Sanskrit, you'll see it's just ya. It's not e-a. It's just ya. Who can read Sanskrit or Hindi? You can read it? You can read it? You can't. Why not? Anyway, yeah, it's just like that. It's not shipati-a. It's just shipat-ya in the actual Sanskrit. And another little technical point, where you've got here, in this case, Kapilavacha, or, in Bhagavad Gita, you get Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, or you get Arjuna Uvacha, or somebody or other Uvacha, somebody said something. That first line is kind of distinct from the rest of the verse. It's not the first line of the verse, because otherwise, you'll get the rhythm and the so on a bit out of whack. So in other words, it's Kapila Ravacha, then Evam Krita Matir Garbe is really the first line. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, you think Kapila Vacha is the first line, and you end up with the last line, and you don't know quite what rhyme or what tune to use. Yeah. Because Prabhupada didn't want us necessarily to become Sanskrit experts, because that's a big thing, but at least to be able to manage in reciting Sanskrit in a sort of decent enough way. Prabhupada definitely wanted that. All right, so Kapila Uvacha. Lord Kapila said, Evam, thus, Kritamati, desiring, Garbe, in the womb, Dashamasya, 10-month-old, Stuvan, extolling, Rishi, the living entity, Sadhya, at that very time, Shipati, propels, Avachinam, turn downward, Prasutyai, for birth, Sutimaruta, the wind for childbirth. Translation. Lord Kapila continued, the 10-month-old living entity has these desires even while in the womb, but while he thus extols the Lord, the wind that helps parturition propels him forth with his face turned downward so that he may be born. Parturition basically means the actual process of birth. Coming out into the world from within, basically. So, that's controlled or facilitated, perhaps, but something like that, by the movement of gas, the movement of wind within the body of the mother. And so there's no purport here. So we'll go on to verse 23 where there is a purport, but we won't bother doing the Sanskrit responsively again. But thank you, Segi, for bringing them. You can take them back afterwards, but just not right now. Don't mind, please. Right, so text 23. Tenavasrishta sahasa kritvavakshira atura vinishkramati krichrena niruchvaso hata smriti. Pushed downward all of a sudden by the wind, the child comes out with great trouble, head downward, breathless, and deprived of memory due to severe agony. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word krichrena means with great difficulty. When the child comes out of the abdomen through the narrow passage, due to pressure there, the breathing system completely stops. And due to agony, the child loses his memory. Sometimes the trouble is so severe that the child comes out dead or almost dead. One can imagine what the pangs of birth are like. The child remains for 10 months in that horrible condition within the abdomen. And at the end of 10 months, he is forcibly pushed out. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord points out that a person who is serious about advancement in spiritual consciousness should always consider the 4 pangs of birth, death, disease, and old age. The materialist advances in many ways, but he is unable to stop these four principles of suffering inherent in material existence. Let me read the verses again. I'll read the Sanskrit for both verses, then the translations. Kapila uvacha ivam krita matir garbe dashamasya stuvan rishi sadya shipatyavachi nam prasutyai suti maruta tenavasrishta sahasa kritavak shira atura vinish kramati kritrena niruchvaso hatasmriti. The 10-month-old living entity has these desires even while in the womb. But while he thus extols the Lord, the wind that helps parturition propels him forth with his face turned downward so that he may be born. Pushed downward all of a sudden by the wind, the child comes out with great trouble, head downward, breathless, and deprived of memory due to severe agony. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Vanchakapatarubhyas Chakripas Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Yes, well, it's just, I was reading through this earlier, and severe agony, breathless, great trouble, deprived of memory, and things like this. Yeah, it's not nice. And it's interesting. The previous chapter, the description of being taken by the Yamadutas at the time of death and put through all those things and so on. As we were going through those verses, gosh, it really made an impression on me that, sure, we just really don't want to go through that again. We really don't want to go through that again. But now, the next thing after going through whatever one would go through during the time of death and whatever you were going to go through before being reborn, now this rebirth program, Krishna, it's too much. It's just too much. And you were reading just a few days ago, I guess, the verse, I think it's number 20, was saying that, well, the child is saying, although I'm living in a terrible condition, I do not wish to depart from my mother's abdomen to fall again into the blind well of materialistic life. In other words, I don't want to be exposed. It's one thing going through death, sure, and then going through birth. But this person is thinking, I'd rather stay inside than go through what is to be gone through when you go out into Chatsworth or the Chatsworth Center or just life in the material world. Better to stay in. It's it's inconceivable or something like inconceivable, really, considering how things are described here, which reminds us, I don't know if anyone mentioned in the last days of classes, but the story of the appearance of Shukadev Goswami, did anyone mention that? It was mentioned, what he went through. Okay. Can I talk about it again? So, Shukadev Goswami was in the womb of his mother. What was her name? Satyavati. And, was it Satyavati? Anyway, in the womb of his mother. And he was impersonally realized. And as such, he, being in the womb, for him, the experience was not too bad because he was above it all in consciousness. He was no longer affected, really, by the bodily experience, the feelings of the body, the pains and pleasures of, like the physical discomfort. As we mentioned, going back a while, when we talked about the hellish experience, I think we talked about how, anyway, maybe it was probably in the beginning of this chapter, how to remain in one position physically, even if initially it's like a really comfortable position, like sitting in a nice chair, that sort of position, or lying in a very comfortable bed, this sort of thing, which the initial experience is one of great comfort, but it does not take long before one feels impelled to move because the body becomes uncomfortable. Am I right? As it happened to you, as it happened to me also a couple of minutes ago, as it happened to you, and it's going to happen to all of us. And if it doesn't happen to you, I think it's just because you're just going to sort of grit your teeth and something like that. So, but being actually on the platform, on the transcendental platform, albeit impersonal, but the experience for Shukadev was such that it didn't matter. It wasn't that he was just sort of tolerating the discomfort, but he was just not affected by the discomfort. And he remained in some sort of impersonal, blissful state of consciousness. But then this time came, the time of parturition. And I'll be honest, I got the idea, but I had to look up, what does this word mean, actually? So it came to that time for Shukadev Goswami, and he just decided, no thanks, I'll hold on. The wind may come to blow me out, but it won't, because I'm going to hold on. Something like that. Otherwise, you just get sort of thrown out, and there you are. Yeah, it's not really a question of choice. So he decided, and somehow he just managed to stay there, beyond the normal phenomenon, because it all kind of builds up to that point, and then delivery occurs. But he didn't go out. He stayed in, exactly for that reason, that he felt frightened. If I go out there, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be exposed to all these attractions and repulsions and just all these, so many things, so many people, and it may influence me. It may influence me to fall down to the material level again and just get caught up again in material life. So he made very conscious decision, I am going to stay here. And he did for 16 years. And it must have been, anyway, you can imagine perhaps, particularly those of you who have given birth to children, for the mother, it was very uncomfortable, to say the least. And therefore she complained to her husband, Vyasadeva, you've got to do something. Please, we've got to get this child out. But Shukadev, they would converse. And he just said, no, I'm not coming, because I don't want to run that risk. And eventually Vyasadeva said, Prabhupada describes, I think in the first canto somewhere, that eventually Shukadev said, Vyasadeva was saying, listen, you got to come out, because it's too much for your mother. You've got to come out. And Shukadev said, you are just a henpecked husband. That's how it's described. Your wife is pushing you, but what's it to do with you, whether I stay here or come out? So eventually, this back and forth came to the point that Vyasadeva suggested, because Shukadev was saying, I just don't trust myself. If I come out and become exposed to the world, I may become weak and just fall into material life. And Vyasadeva was saying, no, you won't. No, you're on such a level. It's not going to happen to you. But Shukadev wisely, you could say, did not agree. And he was saying that, no, I don't trust myself if I become confronted with certain things. So he wouldn't accept. So Vyasadeva said, listen, if I can get Krishna to come from Dwaraka, and if he gives you his word that you will not fall down if you come out, will you come out? And Shukadev said, okay. So Krishna came from Dwaraka to wherever they were living. I forget exactly. Where were they living? Somewhere. Yeah, wherever they were living. And Krishna gave his word. And Shukadev said, all right. And he came out. Not just on the spot. Krishna then left. But then shortly thereafter he came out and ran to escape, because this was the first thing he didn't want to get caught up in, household life. Yeah. So he ran, and Vyasadeva tried to run after him to catch him, but he couldn't catch him. Anyway, a little later, not long after, just within days, Vyasadeva, his wife, was saying, can't you bring him back? You got him out, thank you. But can't you bring him back so we can have a family? So Vyasadeva instructed some of his disciples that you wander around the region, chanting certain verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, And after a little while, you should see one really kind of wild-looking young teenager following you because he's attracted to the Bhagavatam. Naked. So when you see this, just turn around and walk back here, continuing to chant, because he's attracted, and you'll bring him back. So that's what they did, and that's what happened. And Shukadev came back to the home or ashram and studied Srimad Bhagavatam under Vyasadeva. Yes, right. So, but it's really amazing how, not that it happens to every child, that they all go through this vivid reawakening of a very coherent consciousness, like an adult state of intelligence and awareness. Not everyone goes through it, but some do. Maybe some of us went through it. I don't know. As they say sometimes, that some people think that reincarnation has not happened with us because we don't remember it. None of us, I think, and generally very, very few people remember a previous lifetime. And so some people say that because we don't remember it, this is a type of proof that there was no previous lifetime. Because if there was, we'd remember it. But if that's going to be a standard for proof, then what is the proof that any of us were ever in the wombs of our mothers? Because I don't think any of us remember it. I don't. Yeah, we don't remember because, as we read, the memory gets sort of wiped out. The whole experience of being born is so powerful and devastating that one forgets, and one comes out just as a helpless and intellectually incapable child. Now, of course, some people say, what about cesarean birth? Because that is not the same, the drama and the pain and the extreme pressure and whatever else is just not there at all. You just lift it out. There you go. So therefore you don't go through that severe agony, which according to what we have, it says here, we read it was verse 23, the child comes out with great trouble, head downward, breathless, and deprived of memory due to severe agony. But in the case of cesarean birth, it's not there. But don't worry, somehow or other. Somehow between death, the experience of death, and whatever goes on after death and before your next birth, somehow or other, your memory of your previous life and your adult consciousness becomes obliterated. And so you come out as this helpless little child who couldn't even feed themselves if they were not helped. Yes, so somehow the process of death, then going through whatever people go through before they enter the next mother's womb, and then whatever they go through in the next mother's womb, it all adds up. And you, therefore, when people are born in whatever way, then they come out just as typical little children, more or less. So, that the basic point, really, and it's the same point which has been mentioned in other parts of this whole narration and the previous chapter, is that the whole thing is so bad that one at least should not want to, or, one should not want to have to go through it again. And rather, one should want to avoid it. One should want to go back to Godhead. Sometimes the idea like, I want to go back to Godhead. Goloka Vrindavan, I want to go to Goloka Vrindavan. Sometimes that's sort of not appreciated, or, like it's a desire for personal enjoyment, something like that. Rather, we should want to just serve Krishna. But Srila Prabhupada did talk about, on so many occasions, go back to Godhead, and encouraged us to want to go back to Godhead. So it's a good idea. Prabhupada, in Burijan Prabhu's book, Prabhupada gives a class in Japan about how a devotee doesn't care if he or she takes birth again, and is ready to take birth again, as long as they can preach Krishna consciousness and carry on in devotional service. So Prabhupada was talking about that, and encouraging the idea that, devotee, we don't care. Let us take birth again. As long as we can preach and be devotees, it's all right. So at the end of the class, Burijan Prabhu says he approached Prabhupada in a mood of enthusiasm. Prabhupada, I want to take birth again so I can preach and help fulfill your mission, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada gave him a serious look and said, don't force your spiritual master to take birth again to save you. In other words, if you take birth again, it may not be, as a preacher. It may be just as another conditioned soul again. So therefore, the idea that we may go back to Godhead, we should, is a good idea, actually. It's a good idea. And the tendency may well be, it depends on the individual, but the tendency may well be that if we try to cultivate the attitude that we were just saying Prabhupada was talking about, that, we don't care. We'll take birth again, whatever Krishna wants. The problem is that if we're not really advanced enough, it's the same problem with different types of advanced consciousness when you're not qualified for them. trying to artificially, be like this or be like that, when actually it's not your position. The problem is that if you artificially try to somehow manifest a type of consciousness which you're not ready for, you're not qualified for, that you'll just kind of slip away into material consciousness again. Yeah, because it's not real, whatever the idea is of having a particular relationship with Krishna, for example. I'd like to be, what would I like to be? Oh, a gopi. But if it's not real, then you may have that idea in your mind somehow. But if your level is not like that, then gradually your mind will just drift off into material consciousness in one way or another. Therefore, better to focus your mind on types of Krishna consciousness which are relevant and practical and meaningful to you, which includes, let's go back to Godhead, yes, rather than stay in the material world. Yeah. There's a famous story, I don't know how famous, but there's a story of one devotee who got the idea somehow. I've not heard how he got the idea, but he got the idea that he could go to Goloka Vrindavan and become a peacock. And in, I think, the guest house in Krishna Balaram temple, if I remember correctly, he was practicing being a peacock, sort of kneeling down and whatever, in some way practicing. And one devotee was walking by in the corridor and heard these sounds coming from the room and opened the door and saw, here is this devotee practicing to be a peacock. And Prabhupada was informed, and Prabhupada was just not appreciative at all. So there are many dangers in artificially trying to cultivate some state of mind or way of life, some sort of program. There are dangers in trying to cultivate something like that which you are not qualified for. And it's just some sort of, mental phantasmagoria type of thing. And certainly one of the dangers is that because it's not real and it's just not what you are, then your mind will wander back into material existence, and you'll end up back in material existence. Whereas if we stay rooted, or say like that, in a consciousness, perspective on life, perspective on ourselves, and program of activity which is relevant to where we are now, then we can become absorbed and be very satisfied and make progress and see that progress is coming. Yes, so Prabhupada points out, he refers to the famous verse, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Dosh Anudarshanam. Yes, that a person, in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord points out that a person who's serious about advancement in spiritual consciousness should always consider the four pangs: birth, death, old age, and disease. Always. But definitely on a regular basis. Yes, we should always be focused on Krishna, but we should definitely consider relevant things, like what is this world we're caught up in and how we should not be caught up. So therefore Krishna says there, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi, Dukkha Dosha Anudarshanam. Birth, death, old age, disease, dukh, suffering, dosh, fault, anudarshanam, and the darshan. It's just literally the word darshan, the vision that follows, anudarshanam, the vision that follows of misery and faultiness. And therefore, regularly reminding ourselves about what's wrong with being in material life, that will be a real impetus for real progress and for developing a real program of life to facilitate our progress in Krishna consciousness, and not to have to go through this again. Not again. Yes. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? Well, I did mention somehow that they don't go through exactly what is stated here. Deprived of memory due to the severe agony of coming out in that, really under those really difficult circumstances. But somehow or other, in between death and going through whatever they went through, from death to the point they're put in the next mother's body, and then going through whatever in the mother's body, then it gets wiped. I don't know if any of you were born by cesarean section. You could find, there are devotees who are born by cesarean section. You can ask them. Yeah, seriously. It's an interesting point. But somehow, from the time of death, being in some sort of normal adult consciousness, but then through death, and then whatever they go through after death, before being put in the mother's womb, and then when they're in the mother's womb, they definitely change from adult consciousness to a child's consciousness, a baby's consciousness. The experience of death is bad enough. Yeah. And then being stuck in the mother's womb for 10 months, 9 or 10 months, in one position. Yeah. A number of us have changed position in the last half hour or so because it gets uncomfortable. But 10 months, sure, it's amazing. Yes.
You making a comment about that not every soul within the womb will experience that real consciousness.
That's what we read somewhere. It's somewhere in this narration somewhere.
So then, I was wondering, what is this the thoughts of the elevated soul as compared
Well, it's the thought, as I recall, I couldn't point you to the exact place, but I do recall reading it. I don't recall reading that it's some elevated soul necessarily, but what I recall is reading that it happens with some, but not with others. Yeah.
Somewhere in the Bhagavatam it is described that during death, it's like 1,000 scorpions came in. That's a form.
Can what?
Would you like to comment on
Yes, my comment would be, ow. No thanks. Please, please. No thanks.
The pain that we experience through birth and through death, is this part of our prarabdha karma for the fact that we have a body? Because we hear of like living entities on the higher planetary systems who don't necessarily have to go to that.
Right. Yes, it's our karma. It's not just like, well, you got to go through it. But it's definitely part of the karma. Yeah. Because in the higher planets, they just, birth more or less just sort of happens. I mean, the actual birth just happens at the last moment before the woman dies or something like that. And they don't have to go through, because it's, from what we hear, it's it's an experience to give birth, the whole program from beginning to end. And I mentioned a little while ago how some ladies, I remember myself with some lady, I can't remember who it was, in my youth, many years ago, telling us that she was pregnant, baby would kick sometimes, she could feel it. And we would put our hands or heads there, to sort of feel it. And her attitude was, this is a happy sort of interaction between mother and child. But really what it is like baby is like, I can't handle it. And so baby kicks. Something like that.
I am proof of agony. This is my congenital deformity. The pediatrician, one of my friends, explained that I was fidgeting because of the agony.
Oh.
And that's how you find rings developing on the outer sides. The
Oh.
limbs tend to stick out of it.
Really?
Yeah, I have toes also with rings like this.
Oh, really? Phew.
That's proof.
Interesting. Gosh. Anyway, you're a devotee. So it hasn't been an obstacle. Yeah. I mean, each one of us, if we really want to get into it, each one of us has some things, physical, psychological, emotional, some things. But at least we're here in Krishna consciousness, despite our things. Yeah, and we should just carry on and, as Prabhupada said, make the best use of a bad bargain with our material bodies. Marie, you wanted?
Someone arrived at the beginning every day of devotional service by voicemail. I listen a lot to the Bhagavad Krishna pastimes. I enjoy them slowly. Could it be like a wrong idea?
No, I would say if you like it, I think it's nice coming from an authorized devotee. We should make sure you're attending the classes, so you get, a good dose of, you could say, the sort of foundational things. If that was all you were doing, and you weren't attending classes, you weren't reading any of Prabhupada's books, then, it's possible it would not be, the best. But I think it's nice. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.